Welcome everyone, I'm Chef Joe Sasto, and today we are diving into the world of handmade pasta. I'm going to be teaching you how to make cavatelli from scratch with just your bare hands. We're making mortadella meatballs and my mom's famous Sasto gravy. Now I know gravy sounds weird, right? But no, it's actually a red sauce. You probably heard it as marinara, but it's a staple in the Sasto household. I grew up eating this every Sunday and I'm so excited to teach it to all of you. Now, prior to this, you've already done your homework, right? Homework is done. Meatballs are in the fridge. If you haven't done your homework yet, well, maybe pause this video, do your homework, and then you'll meet me right back here. First thing we're going to do today, a little breakdown of what's going to happen. We're going to start with our pasta dough. We're going to bring that together. While the dough rests, we're going to go over to the stove. On the stove, we're going to get our gravy started, our red sauce. While that's cooking, then we'll go back to our pasta. It will have rested by then. We'll make all of our cavatelli in fun little pasta shapes. Then I'll show you how to bring the entire dish together. Sound like a plan? Good? Yes? Yes? All right. Let's do this, shall we? So first things first, we have all of our ingredients here from our ingredient kit. Almost everything is already pre-measured for you. You don't need to do much for this. So with our pasta dough, I like to get this started in a large bowl. That way everything stays nice and contained. It's not as messy and you don't have flour kind of spilling out all over your kitchen. For this type of pasta, I like to think of it as a flour and water dough. In the world of pasta, there's essentially two family trees. You have your egg-based doughs. Those are great for things like ravioli, fettuccine, tagliatelle, any of those filled pastas or long, ribbity noodles. And then from southern Italy, you have your flour and water-based doughs. Those are really great for handmade shapes, things like orecchiette, cavatelli, pici, compunti, any of those ones that are rigid. They have a little more bite and texture to them because there's no fat from the egg yolks. This is a very forgiving dough. It's easy to come together and it only takes about 15 to 20 minutes. For that, we have our large bowl. We're going to grab our flours. I prefer to use a blend of flours for this, so that way you get a nice soft texture from your 00 flour, but then you still have a hard wheat for your added protein. That's where the semolina comes in. So the flour, the 00, is already weighed out for you here. We're gonna get that down into the bottom of the bowl. And then our semolina, it's almost pre-measured for you. What you wanna do is take about a 1/4 cup here, and we're just gonna set that aside. This is going to be used for storing our pasta later. And then the rest of the semolina we could get into the bowl. Now this recipe is all about ratios. So it's very easy to remember and you can scale it accordingly, whether you're just cooking for yourself or for a large group of friends and family. It's equal parts 00 flour to semolina flour. So that way you have the 1-to-1 ratio here. These two we're just gonna bring together. We're not gonna use any salt in this dough. I want the gluten to form as quickly and as strongly as possible. Salt will inhibit that process. So very important that we are leaving the salt out. We're gonna do that in our water later. I have my two flours mixed together here in the bowl, and now we're going to come in with our warm water. I like just using warm water, whatever hot out of your tap is. We're talking about 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit here. And then continuing on with your ratio, we have the whole part of 50-50 flours here in the bowl. Now, whatever half the amount of flour is going to be your water. So 2 parts flour, 1 part water. Now, because pasta dough is one of those things where you can't just rely on the recipe, you got to think of that recipe as a roadmap. Do not add all of your water all at once, depending on the day, the humidity, the age of your flour, how cold or hot your hands are, what kitchen you're in. All of that's going to make a difference and change how much water that you may need. So a 2-to-1 ratio about is your guideline. Sometimes you might need a little less and sometimes you might need a little more water. So we're gonna go almost all of our water here into the bowl. I'm gonna save about a tablespoon or so on the side, and then we're just gonna start by bringing this whole thing together. So I just go right in and just start to squeeze the flour into the water. It seems kind of messy at first, but because we're starting with a drier ratio than adding all of our water at once, the flour is going to absorb that water and it's going to stop sticking to your hands and just start sticking to itself. Very important you don't add all your water at once. Something else to consider is that flour and water takes a second to hydrate. It's not instantaneous. So don't freak out if all of a sudden this seems really dry. All you have to do is give it a moment, squeeze and press all of that water into the dough and give it a chance to hydrate. So at this point, I'm not kneading. I'm just squeezing. I'm pulling and grabbing all of this flour, bringing it into the center mass. So pasta dough does a very good job of telling us how much water or flour it may need. It's alive. If you listen to it, it'll talk to you. What I mean by that is, so I'm looking at my dough ball here. This is now no longer sticky. My hands are nice and clean. Everything's come together, and there's still a little bit of flour down left in the bottom of my bowl. I'm okay with that. I'm actually going to set this aside. That's going to be my sacrifice to the pasta gods. Every time I make pasta, there's always a little bit of flour that doesn't get used, and that's okay. You could try to add a little more water or try to balance it out, but it often gets much more complicated trying to get every single bit of flour incorporated into your dough. Instead, we'll just set this aside and focus on working this. So now we have our dough ball, right? Now it is time to knead. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I'm gonna show you one way, and then you could adapt and do whatever's most comfortable for you. So for kneading, what we're going to be doing is using our dominant hand. For me, that's my right hand. I'm gonna take the heel of my right hand and press it down hard into the center of the dough, stretching it out on itself. I'm gonna take that bit from the far end here, this flap, fold it backwards over into the center. Now I often see people make this mistake, pay attention. They fold it all the way backwards onto itself. Easy to do, but you actually want to be folding it to the center. That way you're capturing air and you're aligning all of that gluten. Now we're going to turn our dough ball, just a quarter turn, keeping it clockwise just to keep things simple here. We're gonna go back with the palm of our hand. We'll press it into the center of the dough, stretching that out. Lift that up, pull it backwards, and press down into the middle again. Now we're gonna turn and just continue this process, stretching and turning and kneading the dough. So what is kneading? Essentially, we're breathing life into this dough here. Like I said, the dough is already alive, but now we're just bringing it to life, right? So what we're doing with every one of these folds and kneads is capturing air, bringing it into the center mass of the dough. We're also aligning and hydrating all of that gluten. Gluten, if you're not familiar, maybe you've heard the word, what it is a complex chain of proteins. When water and protein, which is found in the flour, combine, all of those come together, they form this long web and chain, and gluten is what actually gives bread that wonderful open crumb, that chewy, crunchy texture. It's what makes cakes nice and crumbly. We're all talking about gluten. Essentially, we're made up of gluten, right? Gluten is life. So looking at our dough here, we're about a minute or so into kneading, and now's a good time to assess. So looking at our dough ball, it's not sticky, it's holding together really well. I don't have a lot of extra flour bits on the surface of my board. If you did, and you noticed you have a ton of extra flour floating around here, don't worry, you can scrape that aside. You don't want to accidentally work any of these dry bits that may be on your hands or on your board into your dough. Then you'll have essentially two different stages of flour, and all of these are, again, just part of that sacrifice that we're not going to use. Looking at our dough as well, if it is very sticky, you could grab a little bit of extra flour. I like to use 00 or AP. You don't want to try to work extra semolina into this. It's just harder to do. Semolina takes longer to hydrate. And you could dust a little more on here if you found yourself where you added too much water. Now maybe you're on the other end of the spectrum. This is really hard. It's tearing, it's shaggy, it's ripping, it's not holding together. What you could do is to just wet your hands. Take a wet hand and then work that little bit of water slowly but surely, little by little, into the dough. That way you're not actually pouring water on and you're not accidentally adding too much. You're slowly incorporating it. Now we're all kind of wondering, how long do we have to do this? How long do we need to knead the dough? Every recipe is going to throw out a number there, but let me tell you, that number is totally arbitrary. What it actually depends on more so is efficiency, not an amount of time. If you're taking your time, maybe you're very gentle and delicate, maybe you have really cold hands or not very big arms, this could take you up to 30 or 45 minutes, and that's okay. Maybe you're at the other end of the spectrum. Maybe you're like a machine. You're very efficient. You're in there with both hands. Every movement is like 2 or 3. Then you can be done with this in 8 to 10 minutes. There's no set amount of time that you need to be kneading this. See what I did there? What you want to be focusing on is how the dough feels and how the dough looks. So taking a look here at the surface, it's still very crackly. It's not super smooth. There's not much bounce to it. And you can still see a lot of kind of broken up bits on the surface of the dough. But we're getting somewhere. We have this nice taut top of the dough, all of these bits that we're folding up underneath to the center. I like to think of this as my pasta belly button. That means that we're all going in the right direction and all very good signs. So now I'm just going to continue kneading and turning and working this dough onto itself, continuing this process. And just dipping your hand in the bowl and working in a little more water is a great way to get your dough a little more pliable, a little softer. If you find that it's really hard, really tough to work with, it might just need a tiny bit more water. And then another good tip is that this kneading process doesn't need to be all done at once. If maybe it's taking you a while, you're getting tired, you need to walk away, the dough is really kind of fighting you and bouncing back, what you can do is just set it down on your countertop, maybe grab a bowl or a lid, cover it. Let it sit here 5-10 minutes. Go have yourself an espresso, a glass of wine, maybe some sparkling water. When you come back 5 to 10 minutes later, that little mid-knead rest is sometimes all the dough needs to kind of relax itself, to hydrate some of that flour. And you'll notice instantly it's much softer, it's much more supple, it's gonna be easier to work with and easier to knead. If you want it to get crazy, really make this your own, you could always color your dough. Something I like to do, add a little bit of extra fun and flavor. You could use turmeric, you could use chili flake, you use dried parsley flakes, give it a nice eggshell speckling like a robin's egg. You could also use freeze-dried powders, vegetable powder, beet powder, spinach powder, porcini powder. Any of those will add a really wonderful color and a strong little essence and aroma to your dough. I would normally like to add those powders in the beginning when you are just starting to work together your flour and your water. But if you wanted, you could work it in now and it'll have a very speckled and marble looking pattern. The ratio or the recipe does not change very much if you're using any of those dried powders. But maybe you had a puree or vegetable juice. Sometimes I like to use carrot juice instead of water, or I'll use spinach puree instead of water, because vegetable puree is essentially water. And so you could use that to flavor and season your dough, make it really unique and totally your own. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. So I'd say we've been kneading now for a few minutes. Let's take a look at how our dough has changed and evolved just over that time. It's much softer, it's smoother, it's much more pliable and supple. We still have our nice formation of the belly button down on the bottom, and we're getting somewhere. You can feel the surface of your dough. You don't really feel that semolina anymore. Originally, you felt those kind of little coarse, dry bits. They're all becoming hydrated. They're all working themselves into the dough and developing really nicely. So now I've also had people ask, is it possible to over knead your dough? What I often see happens 8 times out of 10 is that people will under knead the dough just going straight by amount of time instead of the way the dough looks and feels. I've never, in any of the amount of time I've been doing this, seen anyone over knead their dough when they're doing it by hand. Now you could do this whole process in a stand mixer with the dough hook, in which case it's very possible to over knead your dough. You'll notice it starts to tear and fall apart and kind of shreds up into pieces. But in this case, we're doing it by hand. We're gonna get tired long before our dough gets overworked. But taking a look here, I feel really good about where we're at. The dough is nice and smooth, it's supple, everything's tucking underneath on the bottom nicely. If we press into it, there's a nice bounce back. You see a vague indentation of where my finger was. Those are all good signs that the dough is not sticky, that the gluten has been developed, and we're ready to set this aside to rest. Now, you could rest this in a reusable zip top bag. You can use reusable cling wrap. You put it in a bowl with a lid. You just want to protect it from the air while it rests at room temperature on the countertop. So I have some cling here. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to put the smooth part of the dough ball down at the bottom. Then I'm going to grab the edges and gently bring them to the center. I don't want to pull too tight on either side because you want the dough to have even support structure as it's resting all the way around. Then we can just flip this over, tuck that down underneath, and we have this beautiful ball of dough ready to go. I like to rest this at room temperature while we're working on everything else. You could make this the day before, the night before. I don't recommend making it much longer than that. You can very easily do it earlier in the day, but that's all we need to do. Dough is done. Time to get started on our gravy. All right, now for our gravy. We're working our way over to the stove here. I like to make sure I have a pot of water already on the stove. That way it's heating up and ready to go when we're time to cook our pasta. So I'm using a larger big pasta pot here. You need, I'd say, about 6 liters of water. But I'm just gonna set this behind me to keep it heating up. And so this is going to be our large, wide pan that we're using to cook our gravy. You could use some sort of enamel pot like this. You could use a saute pan as long as it has tall, wide sides on it. I'm just gonna go with something like this. So we're looking for like a medium-high heat here on this. Every stove is going to be a little different, so don't be afraid to use your senses and adjust as necessary. But we have nothing in the pan right now. We're just going to slowly start heating it up while we get working on the rest of our ingredients. We have everything that came in the kit over here. So we have our beautiful Bianco di Napoli tomatoes. I specifically chose these tomatoes because they're my favorite. When I was opening a restaurant, I went through about 12 different varieties of tomatoes, tasted them all side by side, and there was just nothing more better than this compared to the DOP, things imported from Italy. I mean, maybe some people hate on it, but these are grown here in California and they're San Marzano. I got to meet the family, the farmers, the growers, just an incredible, incredible product. So if you can, do yourself a favor, try these tomatoes. We have our other ingredients here. For our sauce, we need our onion, we need our olive oil, and we need some garlic. Everything else we can just hold on the side for now. So first, let's peel our garlic. What we want to do for peeling our garlic is keep it as whole as possible. We're not trying to break it up into small pieces, and we don't necessarily want to totally crush it. My favorite way to do this is you just take off that like root piece over here, that bottom kind of thick stem. You could cut that down, and then that peels the rest of the garlic open and exposes the rest of the clove, and then you can just kind of come in with your fingers once you got it started. And take the rest away. We're doing our best to keep the garlic whole. All right, garlic peeled on the side. Time to break down our onion. Now, just minimal knife work on this. There's no right or wrong way to do it. I'm just gonna show you my favorite way to do it in order to work it into our sauce. So I just like to take off the top and the bottom of the onion. Then I will lay it on its flat side. So now you have a nice flat surface to cut on. We're gonna split it in half. So now we have these 2 half moons of the onion. We go ahead and remove that outer peel. And of course, we're in California, so we're gonna be composting all of this, right? You can save it for stock or anything else that you're doing. Now, with our thick cut pieces of onion like this, we're just gonna keep them on our side and then cutting parallel to those cuts on the top and bottom we already made. We're just gonna split this into some thick wedges. So think of it almost like onion rings that are in half moons, right? Something like this. eyebrows, right? We all know, we got this. This is what we're looking for. We don't want to dice. We don't want anything finely cut. We're not looking for a julienne because of the technique that we're using in our sauce. So very important, that's why we're keeping our garlic whole. We're keeping our onion cut thick. That's gonna help everything cook at a nice even rate. So now we have our extra virgin olive oil here. We have our medium hot pan, and we have more than enough oil here for everything we're going to need. I like to start by adding enough oil to give a nice thick layer to the bottom of our pan. Probably way more oil than you've ever used in a red sauce or marinara, but this is all by design. Like I said, my mom's recipe. You trust her, you trust me, we're gonna all be on the same page. Besides, tomatoes are fat-free, so fat is flavor. This is where we're getting it here. We're gonna add almost all of our oil, saving maybe about 2 tablespoons or so. Now our oil is heating up. The reason we don't want to add our oil first is so it doesn't get too hot. Then we'll go in with all of our onions and garlic. Now we want to take a look at our pan temperature. Adjust as needed. What we want to see is what I call action here happening in the pan. So what's action? It's all that sizzling, it's that popping, it's that shallow frying. What we're looking to do and accomplish is to infuse this oil with all of that flavor of onions and garlic. We're gonna get the exterior of the onions and garlic golden brown. The centers are gonna get soft and translucent. And so we wanna play with our temperature, find that nice medium high where our onions and garlic isn't actually sweating, it's actually sizzling and frying. We're not adding any salt yet because we don't want to draw any moisture out of our vegetables. We want to allow all of that heat from the pan to cook these. This like smell is what my house smelled like as a child. This is like my childhood smell. I can't tell you that this is what your house smelled like as a child, because if I knew that, that would be really weird, but just trust me, this is what mine smelled like, and it is just intoxicating. One of my favorite aromas, olive oil, onions, and garlic. And now this is one of those times where you kind of want to go against all of those rules you may have heard on other cooking shows, where you don't want to use nice extra virgin olive oil for cooking. You do want to use nice, good extra virgin olive oil for cooking here, because we're using that as the base of our sauce. It's going to add lots of flavor. You don't want to use a neutral oil like grapeseed or sunflower or something that has no flavor. You're looking for all of that flavor, because that oil is going to be what's seasoning our tomatoes and helping bring all of this together. So this should only take about 5 minutes or so, but you don't really want to walk away from it. You want to stay in here, you want to watch your heat temperature, you want to look at the pan, you want to stir things. You have a good amount of heat coming from the bottom of the pan, so you just want to make sure that you're moving things around and tossing them in that oil so that they're frying evenly. You should start to see some of the skin of the onion souffleing and bubbling and blistering. These are all really good signs. This is my mom's sauce recipe, right? My mom, I grew up in an Italian-American household. She married into an Italian family and had to learn all of these recipes and things when she was cooking for my dad and all of the in-laws. If you don't know a thing or two about Italian-American cooking, there's a lot of onions and garlic in just about everything. Now my mom, she loves the flavor of onions and garlic, but it did something to her stomach. She didn't really like the way it made her feel. So this was her workaround. This was her unique way of making everyone happy. She would fry the onions and garlic in a whole bunch of olive oil, and then what she would do is once they were golden brown, she'd pull them out, set them on a plate aside. They would never actually make their way back into the recipe. And that was because all of that flavor of onions and garlic were already in there. So no one knew that there was not onions and garlic in the actual sauce. She got to eat the sauce, it didn't make her feel bad, and everyone was happy. Moving forward, that became her signature move, and it made her sauce completely unique and different than everything else out there. If you buy a jar of marinara, I guarantee there's onions and garlic pureed into that tomato. It gives it a unique texture, and to me, a somewhat overwhelming flavor. I've worked in a lot of restaurants and I've made a lot of different marinaras and tomato sauces, and I've never seen it done this way. So this is something I totally attribute to my mom. Shout out to her. And even after she passed away, my sisters and I had a hard time creating this recipe until we realized it's not necessarily the ingredients, the type of olive oil, or the type of tomatoes that she used. It's this step right here that can't be skipped, and you can't change it or use a lesser amount of olive oil. Very important. So you can see we're starting to get a little bit of color here on the outside of our onions. Some of that bubbling happening. That's exactly what we're looking for. All right, so those are sizzling. Let's take a look at the rest of the ingredients we have because we're almost ready to take the sauce to the next stage of the process. We have, like I said, our Bianco di Napoli tomatoes. These are crushed, ready to go. If you get yourself whole tomatoes, you can throw them in a food processor or food mill or just crush them with your hands. You can even break them up in the pot. You're just gonna get varying textures on your sauce. Not a big deal. We have our basil. The basil we're actually going to keep held on the side. You keep it in the fridge or just on the side until later. I don't like to add the basil until the very end. We have our seasoning packet. These are our dried herbs. In here we have oregano and thyme, two of my favorite ingredients. You can use fresh thyme, you can use fresh oregano, but I really like the dried stuff. It adds a wonderful flavor and aroma to the sauce, giving it that kind of extra flair. If you are into this sort of thing, you could add some chili flake here, some Calabrian chili paste, anything like that would go really well. But my mom didn't really like spice, so she never really made it a spicy tomato sauce. But you know what? I give you permission to do whatever feels right. We're getting very close on our onions and garlic. While those are going, I'm gonna grab myself a bowl over here. This is gonna be my landing zone when I pull these and drain them out of the oil. So these onions and garlic never actually make it back into the finished sauce. They sit on the side, and what we used to do growing up is that every time one of the boys, me or my brothers or my dad, would come into the kitchen asking when was dinner, hey, we're hungry, my mom would just point to the bowl of onions and garlic. It was right next to a big loaf of Italian bread. Rip off a piece of bread, grab a handful of the onions and garlic, and that would be your little pre-dinner snack to hold you over. Now, if you're not into that sort of thing, I totally understand. These make a great addition to any stir fry, side of vegetables. You put them onto a sandwich, you can put them onto pizza. You can toss them with some grilled vegetables. I've even gone as far as blending these up, turning them into a salad dressing. A little bit of Dijon and lemon juice goes a really long way. If you do a lot of pot roasts or making rice or any sort of grains, you could add these caramelized onions to that, and it'll add a ton of flavor to your finished dish. So now I love the color that we're here. We're golden brown all around the edges. I'm gonna drop the pan temperature all the way down to low, just so the oil doesn't continue to heat up. I'm gonna drain with a slotted spoon my onions and garlic. We're gonna go right here onto this side dish. These are nice and soft, golden brown around the edges, cooked all the way through. Absolutely delicious. You know what would make a really nice snack is a little bit of truffle salt on here. But I'll let you all explore that. Now our pan temperature is coming all the way down. We're going to add our dried herbs, and we're just gonna let them toast in the pan, awaken a lot of those flavors, and infuse into our olive oil for just a few seconds. You wanna be fast here. You wanna have your tomato ready to go on standby. Pan temperature is coming down, herbs are gonna go in. Those are gonna sizzle nicely. Then we're gonna come in with our tomatoes, and just be careful. We have a lot of fat here. Tomato is a lot of water. Hot fat, water don't really mix, so just mindful of any splatter. This might pop at you a little bit, so just be careful. Get every last bit of tomato. Then we'll give this a nice little stir. So now it's time to season, arguably the most important part. Salt, I like using kosher salt. Diamond Crystal is my favorite. Now I can't tell you how much salt to add. It's gonna depend on your own personal taste, the brand of tomatoes that you're using, etc., etc. But you probably start with a 1/4 teaspoon and go up from there. I just like to give it a nice big pinch. And then, depending on the brand of tomatoes that you use and the time of year it is, you may or may not wanna add a small pinch of sugar. I go very, very minimal here. It really just brings out the sweetness that you naturally find in tomatoes. Adding sugar to savory dishes makes them more savory, just like adding salt to sweet dishes makes them sweeter. It's kind of one of those restaurant secrets that we use. Now I'm just gonna stir that in. And the one thing you may be noticing here is that all of that oil is separated from the tomato. That is intentional. That's a really good sign. If you go into any Italian household and you see whatever sort of sugo or sauce is cooking on the stove, you're gonna see this fat cap of oil. All of that oil is flavor. You don't wanna skim that off. That's gonna infuse into the tomatoes and make things more delicious. Don't worry about that. We'll be able to emulsify that into our pasta in our finished dish. Now we just wanna stir that all together. Give it one quick taste to adjust for seasoning. See if you need a little more salt. Maybe you want to add a little chili. Oh man, Mamma Mia. I'm gonna go a tiny bit more salt here. Don't go crazy. We still have our meatballs back there. All that salami does add a nice kind of salinity to the dish. So this just needs to be seasoned well. We'll stir that in. We're gonna go for a low and slow heat here. We really just wanna bring all those flavors together, cook the rawness off the tomato, and help them get infused by all those spices that we added, the dried herbs, the onions, the garlic, the olive oil, bringing everything together. Setting this aside, keeping half an eye on it, then we can work our way back over here to our pasta dough. So we're cleaned up, we're ready for the next stage of our process here. We're actually gonna be making pasta. Remember our dough, it's been resting at room temperature now while our sauce has been going. It is low and slow over on the side, and now we can just unwrap this little bad boy from its packaging. So we have our dough. Depending on how quickly you're working or how large a batch of dough you may have scaled up, sometimes I like to leave this wrapped up in the side, whatever I'm not working with, but because we only have a few portions here, I'm confident in being able to work with it all at once. Coming in here with either a bench scraper, a dough knife, or just a regular knife, we're gonna divide this up into strips. You get these fancy little mustache knives on my website if you're interested. I'll cut this into approximately even pieces. They don't need to be perfect, they don't need to be exact. The size of each piece is really just going to determine how long it ends up being. The length's not important, it's all just in the width. So we'll set those aside. We're gonna start with one piece. It's about the size of my palm, something like that. We're talking about 2.5 ounces if you really wanted to be precise. Then we're gonna come in here and onto a large, clean, unfloured work surface. You shouldn't need flour. If your dough is properly hydrated, it's not sticky, you don't need to put any flour down on here. If you do find yourself, you're starting to roll and it does stick, you could get a little flour on there, but ideally you don't need to. So with our rolling, we're going to use our hands. This center part of the hand is my favorite, right at the base of the fingertips and the top of the palm. I like to start in the middle of my piece of dough and work my way outwards toward the ends. So think of it almost like a reverse typewriter. I know you all probably know what a typewriter is. I don't think that analogy has gotten too old yet, but we go from the center all the way out to the ends. Then once we reach the end, we pick our hands up, we go back to the middle, and we work our way back out to the sides. And the reason I like to do this technique is because it allows us to take the mass of the dough from the middle and work our way out to the sides. Instead of trying to work from one end, it's very hard to move the dough all the way across evenly and efficiently. Instead, you start at the middle and you work your way out to the sides, and you end up with one long, beautiful, thin rope. So the width we're looking for here is about the width of a Sharpie. We're talking about 2 centimeters if you want it to be precise. Honestly, it's not totally important. What you do want is just a consistent width all the way across, because that's going to determine that you have consistently sized pieces of pasta that then all cook at a consistent rate. We'll set this one rope over to the side, and we can do the same thing with the rest. If you find yourself in a position where maybe this is bouncing back on you, it's not rolling out as well, wrap everything up, let it rest a few more minutes. There's a chance maybe that you really worked a lot of gluten into your dough and it's not allowing you to roll it out. It didn't have ample time to rest. Usually 20 minutes is about all you need, but sometimes you gotta let it rest a little longer. There's nothing wrong with that. If on the other hand, you find that you're rolling and maybe your dough is really dry for whatever reason, you live in a humid area, the dough is just sliding on the work surface and it's not allowing you to actually roll. A little trick you could do is to just wet your hands. Use a water mister bottle if you have it. A little bit of water on your hands adds a tiny bit of hydration to the dough, which then gives you some tackiness and allows you to really roll the dough out. It sticks to itself, it sticks to the counter, and you're able to then get another strip. So this is very similar to making Play-Doh, those Play-Doh snakes. The Italians actually call this serpentines. I don't know the last time that you played with Play-Doh. Maybe it was last week, maybe it was yesterday, maybe it was 20 years ago. Maybe you've never played with it. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help you make pasta and be comfortable and confident in doing that. So we're almost done working our dough all the way out. I like to get everything rolled out at once so that way we could cut all of our pieces at the same time. If you have 2 people working on this, you'd be really efficient and have one person rolling serpentines while the other person is cutting and forming pasta. Then you'll both can meet at the end in the same place, forming all of your cavatelli together. All right, so now we have all of our snakes approximately the same size. We're gonna get them all as close together as possible. And then I like to cut them in half, usually somewhere right in the center. Then you could take all of your halves, line them up even more. And now you have one long accordion of all of your snakes. Then you can come in here and just cut them into individual pieces. I like to think of them as little chiclets or little small pieces of gum. Usually I'm cutting about twice as long as they are wide. Now again, the size that you cut these to does not need to be precise. It does not need to be perfect. There's no right or wrong size to cut these to. What is important is that they're all the same size. So that way they all cook approximately at the same rate. All these different sizes are gonna do is just allow you to make different styles and shapes of cavatelli, but all still cavatelli at the end of the day. I'll cut a few different varieties and show you what I mean. So we'll cut some really small, we'll cut some really long, and we'll cut some somewhere right in the middle. So we have a few different lengths here, just so you can see the different variations that we end up with. Keeping half an eye on our tomato sauce as well. You're not looking for it to be reducing, you're not looking for a rapid or wild simmer. Just a couple of small bubbles is really all you need, so half an eye on that. Feel free to adjust the temperature as needed. So now we have a variety of different shapes. So let me show you how to make cavatelli. Cavatelli simply means little hollows. And I think once we get these shapes formed, you'll see exactly what I mean. So some of the simplest ways to do this is just with your hands. You could use your index finger, you could use your thumb. I'll show you both ways. You're gonna place your piece of pasta just right on your work surface. And then either using your finger, you could press and drag, pulling the dough towards you. It'll curl up and create this small little hollow known as a cavatelli. You could also do the same thing with your thumb, but I find it's a little easier if you're using your thumb to roll away from you. It's going to catch the sauce and allow the pasta to cook evenly all the way through. Now the trick here is really just finding the right bit of pressure that you're gonna use. Not too hard and not too soft. If you don't press hard enough, the dough itself is not going to form that cup and it's gonna left with big, thick, chunky pieces of pasta. So you just wanna make sure you're pressing hard enough that the dough creates a hollow so that way it cooks evenly and you don't end up with these big, chunky, hard to cook pieces of pasta. Now those are very simple, rustic cavatelli. There's a few other ways to do this. You could also use a bench scraper or a knife. Same premise, but you're using the bench scraper and your hands now and your finger is going to be applying the pressure. So what you can do here is to come in and grab the dough and allow it to curl up over the end of the bench scraper and create that same small little hollow. Now what's nice about this is that they're a little more uniform. You get a nicer, deeper, more defined cup, but you can also line up a few of these at the same time and do multiple pieces of pasta at once, which does help speed up the process along the way. Now let's get a little creative, right? We have our bench scraper, we have our rustic, smooth cavatellis. Now we can put a little bit of texture on them if we wanted. Perhaps you had a really nice Caravola board or a gnocchi board. Either one of these work really nicely to add texture to your dough. Doing that same motion, pressing down and dragging across the board allows you to put all of these beautiful little ridges on your piece of pasta. Now you can do the same thing with your scraper, pressing down and dragging on the board to get different sizes and different shapes of cavatelli. Now the same thing on this board over here. We have 3 different textures to choose from, allowing you to use. Now let's pretend you don't have either one of these fancy pasta making tools. That's okay. I have some options for you. And this is where you get to be creative in the kitchen. Go look in your utensil drawer or your bane where you have all of your kitchen tools and see what you have that has texture. So I was able to find a cheese grater, this pasta strainer, and a fork. So what I mean by that, the fork, we do the same thing on here. If you hold the fork as if you're going to use it like a pencil, I like to place it on the inside of the fork, dragging with my thumb all the way across and tilting the fork up when I get to the end, allowing the piece of pasta to fall off and create that beautiful texture and cup. Now you could do the same thing if you had a cheese grater, giving yourself beautiful texture and that same indentation all along. Let's see if we can get some texture on there. We have these big beautiful bubbles. Another great fun thing. Now I've seen everyone use, I like to challenge people, see what they can come up with. Someone once sent me a picture of them using an avocado, that texture on the outside of an avocado, to shape all of their cavatelli. So you can have a lot of fun with this. I want to see what different things that you come up with. I'm going to get in here and form the rest of these into pasta, and then I will meet you back on the other side. All right, the moment we have all been waiting for. We're ready to bring this entire dish together and then eat. I'm over here on the stove. I have my pasta water boiling behind me, ready to go, but I'm gonna get started on my meatballs first, doing everything on this little induction. But if you have a stove, you could do all of these steps at the same time, side by side. We're gonna go here on the stove over a medium-high heat again, allow our pan to start to heat up. We're gonna use the remainder of our olive oil from earlier down in the bottom of the pan. This is what we're going to use to fry our meatballs in. So our meatballs are going right from the fridge. You do want to make sure your pan is hot. A good way to tell if your pan is hot is to take a look at the way that the oil ripples in the pan. If you see a nice rippling, that's a sign that you have really hot oil. Great things. Hot oil means no sticking. You could use a non-stick pan. Stainless steel is actually non-stick if it's hot enough. So a good way to test is to take one of your meatballs, put it down into the pan. If you see and hear a sizzle, it's ready to go. If not, maybe just give it another 30 seconds to heat up. So what we're looking to do here is just get a little caramelization, some color and flavor on the outside of our meatballs. They're small, they're gonna cook all the way through very quickly, especially once we get our sauce and pasta in there. So what we're looking to do is just get it lightly brown on each side. You don't need to go all the way around and worry about getting them crusty all over the edges. You don't wanna overcook them. So just a little color on the top and bottom is really all that you need. Once you see these are nicely golden brown, you can go ahead and turn your pan off and set it aside while you get your pasta into the boiling water. So we have our pasta water here ready to go. It is up to a boil. Now it is time to season our pasta water. I don't like to add salt until right before I'm about to use it for two reasons. Salted water takes longer to come to a boil, and two, if you add your salt early, there's a chance your water will reduce and it'll get too salty, which you don't want. So now for our salt, there's not a golden ratio for how much salt to add to your water. You do not want your water as salty as the sea. That's just way too salty. If you've ever tasted ocean water or tasted sea water, it is just gross. Nowhere near something you want to cook with. Instead, you're looking to make your pasta water well seasoned. Think of it like water soup. At the end of the day, it should be something delicious. You should want to stick your spoon in here and taste it. By no means should it be as salty as the sea. So here we have our water seasoned. Our pot is up to a boil. It's time to drop in our pasta. So I've tossed this pasta as it was sitting in the side with that reserved semolina flour that we had, ensuring that none of our pieces are sticking together. If you did want to make this very far in advance, you could make your pasta the day before or the morning of and just toss it with the semolina, keep it on a tray or a plate, lightly covered with a clean towel in the fridge. It'll hold very nicely. Anything longer than that, it'll start to dry and it'll cook unevenly. After all, fresh pasta is the best pasta. So our pasta is in the water. We got our noodles down. I'm gonna come in here with a spider and just give everything a real gentle stir. Make sure nobody's sticking down in the bottom of the pot. And now depending on how thick that we rolled our individual noodles, this is gonna take anywhere from 4 to 6 minutes or so to cook. It may take up to 8 or 9 if you roll some really thick pieces when you had your serpentine rolled out, but you could always try one and taste. At the end of the day, we have our palates. We need to trust our palates. Some people like their pasta very al dente, and some people like their pasta a little more well done. We're not here to judge anyone. If that's what you want to eat, I'm here to encourage that and to support that decision. While our pasta is cooking, we're gonna come over here with the basil that we have. So now we're gonna just pick the basil that we need to go into our sauce. So I've pulled it off the heat, it's ready to go. The gravy is hanging out. I'm gonna go ahead and grab all of these large exterior leaves from the basil and just pick them off the stem. Those are gonna get stirred into our sauce. And then nature actually does a really nice job of giving us these little petite, beautiful garnish pieces of basil. These little ones right here, we could plate on top, make a really nice, pretty picture for Instagram. You can tag us. And also you eat with your eyes first. So I always like to take that extra step, even if I'm at home cooking for myself, and save these nice little inner beautiful baby leaves as garnish. The large exterior leaves, we're just going to toss into our sauce. So the heat of the sauce is gonna do enough residual cooking to break down the basil. Much like spinach, when you add it to something hot, you don't have to worry about chopping or cutting any of this. Just toss all these large leaves right in. You want that bright, fruity, floral essence of basil that comes through from tossing it in right at the last couple of minutes, letting the residual heat of the pan cook that down and bring out all of that perfume into your kitchen. So we can always check one of our pieces of pasta just because it's been 4 to 6 minutes doesn't guarantee that it's done. What I like to do is just pull one piece out here, take a bite of it, and look at the center. So what you're looking for here is one consistent color all the way through. You can see here there's a white inner ring, which is a sign that your pasta can cook a little longer and it needs more time in the water. All right, so we're jumping in here. One more taste test just to check before we pull them out of the water. There we go. Nice soft on the exterior, little bit of chew in the center, one even pronounced color all the way through. There's no white ring, which shows the center of the pasta would be uncooked. And then also keep in mind, we're going to be cooking our pasta about 90% here in the water. The last 10% is gonna happen in the pan. The marriage of the noodle and the sauce, which will have us with a wonderful bowl of pasta. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab all of this using a spider or strainer, bring together some of that pasta water, going right into my meatball pan. That starchy pasta water is gonna be our friend. It's gonna help everything emulsify and come together. In the restaurant, we used to make just starch stock with extra leftover pasta that wasn't seasoned, and that way we'd be able to add it to our pasta sauces and control our salt level. So I'm just gonna grab a small ladleful, about an ounce or two of our pasta water to add here to our meatball pan. So now the next step here, the last thing we want to do is what the Italians call trazinare, which means to drag through or bring together. We want to marry our sauce with our noodle, which then would make pasta. Pasta is the combination of noodle and sauce. So we have our starchy water, we have our meatballs in here. We're going to bring this back up to a simmer, and we're going to grab a couple ladles of our Sunday gravy. Now you can make this as saucy as you'd like. You end up with a little bit of extra gravy here on the side, which actually freezes really well. It's great for salad dressing or for pizza. Maybe you're making an Italian hoagie tomorrow, or if you want to just dump it all in there, that's fine too. Sometimes I drink this stuff with a straw, it's that good. So we have a few ladles, everything together. We're just going to gently swirl and stir our entire mix. Now, through this agitation, we're creating an emulsion. This is going to be our pan sauce, bringing together the fat and oil with the starches of the pasta. The noodles are gonna suck up a lot of that tomato flavor. They're gonna release some of those starches, thickening and creaming our sauce without any additional cream or butter. So bringing this up to a simmer. So now we just wanna bring up the heat on the pan, get a nice bubble and sizzle going here. It's gonna evaporate any of that pasta water. It's going to tighten and thicken up our sauce, ensuring that every single noodle and mortadella meatball in there stays covered and coated with our luscious gravy. Then last but not least, we have this little packet of our truffle salt here. So a little extra special finishing to the dish. This is totally optional if you want to add a little bit of extra salt. We can just sprinkle some of this in. It'll add a nice earthy undertone to the whole dish and play really nice with the mortadella in the meatballs. Rich, decadent, luscious, super herbaceous from the thyme and the basil, the oregano. A little bit of heat from that salami in there. then the creaminess from all of the starch in the pasta. All right, beautiful plates here. Now we just want to come in with our finishing moves. A little bit of our extra cheese grated right on top. A little bit of our truffle carpaccio. So these are shaved summer truffles that have been salted and lightly preserved in some olive oil. So you get the taste of fresh truffles year round. Then last but not least, we'll come in with our little baby basils that we saved from earlier. And my friends, there we have it. Sunday gravy, handmade cavatelli, and mortadella meatballs. And just because we're all a little bit extra, we got that truffle salt and truffle carpaccio on there. I mean, if you're asking me, this is great for Sunday dinner or any night of the week. Thank you everyone for having me in your homes, for cooking along. I want to know what you think of this. Don't forget to tag us on Instagram and social media. And last but not least, let's dive in here for a bite, shall we? Get a little bit of everything. That's so good. Cheers, everyone.